Falun Gong, a lot of our viewers probably have never heard of this before.
I'd never heard of it before.
What is it about it that is, one, so scary for China, and two, so great that these people are risking everything to practice it?
So there are tens of millions of Falun Gong practitioners in China. What is it exactly? You saw the people kind of doing the stretches. It's basically spiritual meditating and a sense of bettering yourself through spirituality. And why does the Chinese government have a problem with it? Again, there are tens of millions of them. They're very well organized. They've held protests before because of these crackdowns, and the government doesn't like that. They see it as a threat to their power, even going as so far as to call it a menace to society. So it's really just, they're threatened by them. There's so many of them. At one point, years ago, they actually outnumbered the Communist Party.
There was from different kind in society. It was many policemen and military.
It was just fundamental part of society at that time, and everybody knew somebody who practiced.
Falun Gong is a traditional practice of self-cultivation, a practice of slow-moving exercises, meditation, and studying of the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and trying to adopt those into your life.
While morning exercises had always been popular in China, Falun Gong brought more than just health benefits.
For thousands of years, the Chinese people have believed in Buddhas and Taos and becoming an immortal. Falun Gong really dared to talk about these things. And immediately people took it to heart. Oh, the true ancient good things of China have come back.
However, after 50 years of political campaigns to destroy traditional beliefs, any revival of spirituality was seen as a threat to communist rule.
Since I was 11, I experienced all of the Chinese Communist Party's campaigns. Group after group of good people were targeted. There was no faith, no truth.
My family on my grandmother's side, they are Christian before the CCP took power. So some of the relatives even flee to US before the CCP took power. And after the CCP took power, they have very severe persecution on Christian. Why? Because CCP want to control what people think, want to control people's mind. If someone believes in religion or someone believes in doing good deeds, then it can be a threat to CCP, because at some point they will refuse to follow the CCP's order. That's why CCP started to persecute religion, started to persecute Christian, and then the Buddhism, and now the Falun Gong. So it's a tradition with CCP.
So the first was the numbers. 100 million people practicing Falun Gong. At that time, that's 1 out of every 13 people in the country. That's 40 million more people than there are total members of the Communist Party. So when the Chinese government did a survey in late 1998 and found out those numbers, that made a few leaders nervous. But the key issue, the thing that really pushed it over the edge, was the top man of the Chinese Communist Party at the time, Jiang Zemin. He was the first leader of China who didn't go through the revolution. He didn't really have any street cred among the other leadership, and he was desperate to build up this sort of cult of personality around himself, much like Mao and other leaders. And right as he's trying to do that, in the 90s, Falun Gong is taking the country by storm. And it was that political motivation, tragically, was what really started the persecution.
Jiang Zemin issued the order, set up special office called 610 Office, in charge of nationwide campaign of persecution.
Known as China's Gestapo, the 610 agency was above the law and could use any and all means necessary to achieve its sole mission, to eliminate Falun Gong.
Falun Gong, a religious movement that emphasizes on spiritual enlightenment and cultivation of virtue. But virtues and enlightenment, you see, do not exist in the Chinese Communist Party's dictionary. So it banned this religious movement in 1999. It drove its practitioners into exile.
Hundreds of thousands of its practitioners were arrested and detained. They were incarcerated in labor camps. They were subjected to torture, arbitrary execution, and organ harvesting. In 2006, a report by Canadian MP David Kilgour uncovered China's atrocities on Falun Gong practitioners. The report revealed a significant increase in China's annual organ transplant since 1999, the year when China began the crackdown.
With millions of practitioners in detention, one of the worst crimes in history began taking place in hospitals throughout the country as organ transplants suddenly began to skyrocket.
We've been asked to investigate allegations that there has been harvesting of organs of Falun Gong in China. Our bottom line conclusion, after considering everything as best we could, was that the allegations are true.
I began conducting comprehensive interviews with medical professionals, Chinese law enforcement personnel, and over 50 refugees from the Laogai system. But I estimate that 65,000 Falun Gong were murdered for their organs from 2000 to 2008.
Essentially what organ harvesting means is they're taking Falun Gong practitioners literally like cattle, holding them in prison camps, testing their blood and other vital organs, and when someone comes into the country that needs a heart, a liver, a kidney, they find a match, they take the Falun Gong practitioner, extract their organs, of course killing them in the process.
Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, incarcerated, their freedoms taken from them, tortured.
Sourcing organs from Falun Gong practitioners became an inexhaustible source of funds. They were defenseless and unorganized. They were depersonalized through vilification.
Their body parts and organs harvested for state profit, a form of state capitalist cannibalism of their own citizens.
Your courage, your determination, hopefully with the help of some of us, however we can, will one day result in the Falun Gong getting their rights and freedoms reestablished.
Today, there are tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have been imprisoned in China for their non-violent peaceful activities. Falun Gong practitioners never harmed anyone. They just did their own prayers or meditation on their own. That's the question we want to ask Chinese government. Why do you want to hurt and harm people who never hurt you or hurt anyone else?
The U.S. House has just passed a bipartisan bill targeting the Chinese regime's decades-long persecution of the spiritual practice Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa. NTD's Jack Bradley brings us more on the vote.
The Falun Gong Protection Act would require the U.S. to sanction any individual involved in or facilitating the Chinese regime's forced organ harvesting of its own people. Now, this means visas revoked and property transactions in the U.S. also revoked. It would also require the U.S. to form a policy to avoid cooperation with China in the organ transplant field. Now, this bill passed the House on a voice vote. It was led by Congressman Scott Perry. It's a bipartisan bill. Here are his comments on the House floor.
This bill is the first binding commitment by Congress to take strong legal action against the persecution and forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong, making Falun Gong the centerpiece of legislation, an action long overdue after 25 years.
Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And in China in 1999, the practice grew to have 100 million followers. That's when the Chinese regime launched its brutal persecution of the practice, imprisoning, torturing, and killing these practitioners for their organs. And this persecution still goes on today.